is Dan Dix here, reporting for Press for Truth. And the new budget that was introduced recently by the Liberal government in Canada is a complete failure, and it really paints not so pretty of a picture here of the future. There's another bail-in clause in this budget, and just like the Conservative budget from 2014, this new Liberal budget has a heading buried all the way down here on page 223, way down as we scroll here down to the bottom. We eventually reach a section here titled Introducing a Bank Recapitalization Bail-in Regime. It reads as follows: to protect Canadian taxpayers in the unlikely event of a large bank failure. Yeah, well, it's unlikely because our banks are just as big, if not more over-leveraged than the American banks were in the run-up to the 2008 housing crash and then subsequent recession. The government is proposing to implement a bail-in regime that would reinforce the bank shareholders and creditors that they're responsible for the bank's risks, not taxpayers. Yeah, well, it might as well be taxpayers, because the Canadian banks are really a cartel. Even small-time credit unions are bound by federal regulations and rules. So yes, a bail-in means stealing your deposits to prop up bad lending practices instead of relying on taxpayers as a whole to bail out the banks. So either way, most Canadians are screwed here. If you have any money in the bank, there's never been a better time to get it out than right now. Put it into something tangible like gold or silver or some kind of possessions that are going to become scarce in the case of an economic meltdown. Things you would never think of beforehand, like toothbrushes and toothpaste and soap and bottled water and seeds to grow your own food. This would allow authorities to convert eligible long-term debt of a failing systematically important bank into a common shares to recapitalize the bank and allow it to remain open and operating. Well, as we have covered here before, like in this video, Cyprus and the Canadian connection, a bail-in means that the banks are going to reach into your bank account and just take what they need in order to pay off their shareholders. Just like what happened here in Cyprus a few years ago. Now here's an idea. Why don't we just allow the banks to fail? If they engage in risky loans and they can't balance their books, then they deserve to fail. And meanwhile, if the governments want to help, well, they can scrap all these rules and regulations that prevent Canadians from opening up their own banks. Like if you would want to open up a factory or a retail outlet. Because, there's nothing inherent about banking where only a few elite at the top can provide this service. Really, the more banks, the better. It would help to keep fractional reserve banking in check, and I guess it's pretty obvious why the government is not going to be doing that anytime soon. Such a measure is in line with international efforts to address the potential risks to the financial system and broader economy of institutions perceived as too big to fail. Well, they're not wrong in a sense. It's certainly in line with the globalist efforts for a world currency and a world banking platform. But this is going to do the complete opposite of ending the too big to fail regime. It's only going to set us up for an even larger too big to fail regime. A global Ponzi scheme that is going to leave us all off way worse than we were before. So there's no such thing as too big to fail. This fascist system has enough inner contradictions that it has to fail eventually. All the liberals are doing here is kicking the can down the road. It's a common trait amongst democratic governments. The government is proposing to introduce framework legislation for the regime, along with accompanying enhancements to Canada's Bank Resolution Toolkit, regulations and guidelines setting out further features of the regime will follow. This will provide stakeholders with an additional opportunity to comment on elements of the proposed regime. So, in other words, let the bankers write all of the rules here. And finally, we get this little self-congratulatory blurb here. It says, Canada's financial system performed well during the 2008 global financial crisis. Since that time, Canada has been an active participant in the G20's financial sector reform agenda aimed at addressing the factors that contributed to the crisis. This includes international efforts to address the potential risks to the financial system and broader economy of institutions perceived as too big to fail. Implementation of a bail-in regime for Canada's domestic, systematically important banks would strengthen our bank resolution toolkit so that it remains consistent with best practices of peer jurisdictions and international standards endorsed by the G20. Yeah, okay, Canada got lucky in 2008, and this luck is definitely not going to be repeated. In fact, never mind that. There wasn't any luck involved at all. We got secret Federal Reserve bailouts. The implementation of a bail-in regime is not unique to the Liberal Party. The Conservatives were favorable to this as well, and this is also favorable to the global community. It's a so-called best practice amongst the bankers, and of course, it's endorsed by the criminal syndicate known as the G20. And as George Carlin famously said, it's a big club, and you ain't in it. But in good news here, perhaps a failure of Canada's banks, this poster child for the elite, and a subsequent bail-in will awaken more Canadians to this madness of the system and the need for peaceful revolution. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Be sure to fact-check this info yourself by checking all the links in the description. And stay tuned, guys. We've got more videos coming soon to pressfortruth.ca. Care of the family business in that country. With their huge accumulation of wealth, the family established branches of the House of Rothschild in Berlin, Vienna, Paris, and Naples. When Meyer Amschel Rothschild died on September 19, 1812, he left a will in which he laid down specific laws by which the house that bore his name would operate.